can you say something or?
Can you hear me now?
Okay. Well. Well. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better.
You can hear me though.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay, great.
So Chair Smith, the meeting is now live.
Thank you. Welcome everybody. Today's March 9th, 4:04. We are for the special Board of Police Commissioners meeting regarding the budget. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that Halifax Regional Municipality is located on Mi'kmaq, the ancestral, traditional, and unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaty signed on this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. Moving on to approval of the order of business, approval of additions and deletions. I believe there is something to be added, clerk.
Yes, Chair Smith, we have one addition. It's item 5.1, which is approval of minutes, January 31st, 2022 revised. And there's no deletions.
All right, so it's a mover and a seconder for this.
I move that we accept the additions as presented.
All right.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Moved by Commissioner Blackburn, seconded by Commissioner McDougall. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Okay. Call for declaration of conflict of interest.
So Chair Smith, excuse me,
Do
you want to move the approval of minutes before the main agenda item, which is the Halifax Regional Police budget?
Yeah, let's approve the minutes just so we can do that. So approve minutes of January 31st, 2022.
I'll move that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Moved by Commissioner Kent, seconded by.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Commissioner Blackburn. January 31st minutes. No errors or omissions. Hearing none. Call for the question.
Question.
All those opposed or all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. All right, those are adopted. Now going to call for declaration of conflict of interest. Are there any conflicts? Seeing none, I believe we covered. Yeah, all right, moving on to our business. Revised Halifax Regional Police 22-23 proposed operating budget. Chief Kinsella, floor is yours. Oh, actually, before you do that, Chief, I did realize that we don't have Commissioner Thomas. And I'm sorry that I didn't realize that sooner.
Chair Smith, we have reached out to the commissioner. We are resending the link and trying to make contact with him.
Okay, great. All right. Sorry, I didn't realize that. All right, Chief, you're up.
Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon to you and members of the Halifax Board of Police Commissioners and members of the public who are joining us today. Thank you once again for the opportunity to present on the 2022-2023 operating budget. As we know, prior to today's meeting on February 23rd and 25th, we presented our proposed budget to Council as the next step in the process. Those meetings had followed presentations to the board on December 13th, January 17th, and January 31st. And the Board of Police Commissioners approved the original proposal. Following discussions at Council and according to the process, we are back to you now to present a revised proposal with reduced overall budget and a revised list of enhancements. Further to the discussion at Council, Halifax Regional Police is proposing an operating budget of $89,195,000. This represents a net operating budget increase of $384,200 compared to the last fiscal, which also amounts to an increase of 0.432%. Over the past months, we have had extensive discussions, and I very much appreciate the engagement of the board, the public, and all the members of the Halifax Regional Police. As I have said before, much thought and consideration has gone into every step of this process. And the revised proposal features requests that would help fill some of our most critical operational gaps in frontline response and communications. Additionally, the resource associated with the hate crimes unit is an important resource that would allow us to do more in an area which has historically been underserved and underreported. It is an area we must do better in as a rapidly growing, diverse, and multicultural city's police service.
Chief
Presentation today.
Kinsella, this is Ian McLean. Can I confirm which slide you would like this to be on?
On the very first slide, please, Ian.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. My presentation today will be brief. It will primarily be a financial summary of the new proposal. I'll be happy to take any of your questions afterwards, along with members of the team that are present with me here today. I want to once again take the opportunity to acknowledge the members of the Halifax Regional Police, both sworn and civilian. I know that they are out there working hard every day, day in, and day out, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, to deliver on the public safety needs of our community. And thank you to the Board of Police Commissioners and to members of the public for your time and attention. With that, can we go to the next slide, please? As I mentioned in my opening, today's presentation follows extensive discussions with the board on 3 previous occasions, followed by 2 council meetings. Next slide. On February 25th, council voted to agree to consider an enhancement to the Halifax Regional Police 2022-2023 budget in the amount of $1,393,866.18. Next slide. Here is a revised list of service enhancements that fit within the enhanced envelope from council. As you can see, these resources are responsive to our most critical gaps that we have discussed in great detail over the past several meetings. Additionally, as I said in my opening, we are really hoping to bolster our ability and overall capacity to investigate hate crimes and hate incidents. While we will also get some protection and support for HRP's frontline and communications response. Work has already begun in this area. And next slide. This is the associated financial summary to the revised options. You will note that the new revised reduced ask is $1,365,000, which is $28,866 less than that returned from council. Next slide. And we're available for any questions.
Thank you, Chief. All right, commissioners who would like to actually, before we do that, if you want to, whoever speaks first, like to put the motion on the floor, and I don't see a motion. So I'm assuming, Andrea, that someone put the motion on the floor, how they would like to proceed. There's no general motion on the agenda.
There's no general motion on the agenda. Perhaps Ian can give us a little bit, Ian McLean can give us a little more direction in terms of how we'll proceed.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Smith. So, Chair Smith, I will put into the chat a draft motion based on the presentation that was provided. It discusses a Schedule A, which is the items that were listed by Chief Kinsella in the over part of the presentation. I have posted this into the chat now. That would be the presentation-based motion that Chief Kinsella, based on the presentation that Chief Kinsella gave today.
Yeah, okay. Can somebody, thank you very much. Can someone put that motion on the floor so debate can start? Please.
I can do that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
I move that the Board of Police Commission recommend that the Halifax Regional Council approve the increase in Halifax Regional Police full-time equivalent positions set out in Schedule A And 2, that the Budget Committee direct the Chief Administrative Officer to prepare the Halifax Regional Police 2022-23 budget and business plan as approved by the Board of Police Commissioners on March 9, 2022, subject to Regional Council's approval of any increase in FTEs. I so move.
Seconded by. Need a seconder.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Commissioner McDougall. Commissioner Blackburn.
Oh, thank you very much. So I don't know how many folks heard the debate that took place during council, but certainly I think those who spoke on this made it clear that they were not in favor of the full 2.9, but certainly understood there was a need to beef up staffing in some areas of HRP. One of the main conversations that was had was with regard to traffic officers and just what's that going to mean once we get the ability to have photo radar. We've heard recently from the province that the new Motor Vehicle Act that apparently will be ushering in the era of photo radar to the province is at least two years away, maybe even 3. So I guess just sort of leaving that information there with you. I do have a question for Chief and staff. I'm just wondering, do you guys have a handle on how many sworn officers are expected to retire in the next 5 years?
Through you, Chair, to the Commissioner. No, we don't have the exact number 5 years out. We do know that we do have a fairly regular attrition rate. I can get those numbers. I just don't have them at my fingertips.
Gotcha. I suppose that's one of those things that's kind of hard to put a finger on because people don't necessarily know 5 years from now that they might be approaching that age, but not necessarily ready to retire. So I definitely appreciate that. But I'll just open the floor and just listen to my commission colleagues to see what they have to say about the revised budget. Thank you.
Gosh, sorry, I was muted. Commissioner Pritchett.
Okay, thank you so much, Chair Smith. I want to thank first the chief and his team for the work in preparing an updated budget. I know, it's as the chief mentioned, it's been a number of months of back and forth, and I want to suggest that perhaps that's a more time-consuming process, but it's actually a really good thing. It's good that we have discussions. It's good that we receive information. The role of the board is to act as a conduit for the community and to ensure that the information is out there so people can understand how our police service is operating, where the concerns are, what the rationale is for changes, what the evidence is in support of changes. And so I have a number of questions, Chief. And so the first one relates to sort of some of the thought that went into what was cut from the change from the initial budget proposal to this budget proposal. And I know that comparing patrol constables and victim services and FOIPOP officers is sort of like comparing apples and oranges. They're different things, they're different positions, they do different things. But it would be great to know what the rationale was and what the evidence was that supported this modified budget. So that would be my first question. I'll just list them all if that's all right. Or would it be easier if I do them one at a time?
You can do them all.
Okay. My next question is going to be relating to the removal of, it's related to the first question. So it's going to be related to the removal of the victim services coordinator. And I have to say, I'm going to speak honestly that in my view, I'm quite concerned by the removal of that position. I understand the reduced envelope, but I think what we've seen over the course of the last 2 years of the pandemic is massive spikes in the reports of domestic and intimate partner violence and gender-based violence. We have a whole federal and provincial commission of inquiry looking into an incident of gender-based violence at this very moment. I have a number of stats prepared that I'd be prepared to present to the commission, but I would suggest that victim services plays a very critical role, particularly as it relates to gender-based violence, which is an area that this board just last month has decided to dedicate some significant attention and resources to as it relates to a special consultation meeting. So I would suggest that I am just a bit uncomfortable with the removal of that position. I understand that these are difficult decisions to make. There's no easy answers, but I would suggest that that is a bit of a sticking point for me, the removal of the victim services position. I'm going to start with those two questions. Actually, sorry, another third question would just be the piece around the shift from, I believe it was originally 8 emergency response communicators to now a supervisor trainer and 3 part-time positions. So if you could say a little bit more about that shift as well. And one final piece I would add, I guess maybe my fourth question is, I understand and I really appreciated at our meeting on January 31st, the information that you provided, which I assume was also provided to council as it related to understaffing in patrol. And I think that provided us an important, that information, that data provided us a window into the realities of what was going on. And I mean, I had asked, I believe it was a week or a week and a half ago, to see to what extent, if at all, have increases in understaffing had on what the effect of increases in understaffing has been, if at all, on response times. And I understand that perhaps that's a difficult thing to provide on a year-over-year basis, but I had requested data regarding response times on a year-over-year basis for priority 1, 2, and 3 calls, going back at least to pre-COVID, so 2018, 2019, to account for the the huge dip in calls that would have occurred during the pandemic. Because again, while I appreciate the information that was provided on the 31st as it relates to understaffing, I still don't necessarily feel like I have the full picture in understanding the effects of the understaffing. So if Chief, you're able to say anything about response times and for the different priorities calls, that would be really much appreciated. So those are my 4 questions.
Thanks, Commissioner. Chief.
Thank you, Commissioner, and through you, Chair, to the Board of Police Commissioners. So I'll just go back, if I could, Chair, to Commissioner Blackburn's question around those able to retire in the next 5 years. What I have been able to get for you, Commissioner Blackburn, that as of today, 77 sworn members of the service are eligible to retire. So that's where we are as of today. We're going to work on some of the longer predictions of who's going to go in subsequent years, but it will take us a little time to get you that information. So 77 as of today eligible. Moving on to the next set of questions. So, the question around the thought that went into what was cut, I would say it was really the thought that went into what was kept. And I think that's an important way to view it. We had extensive deliberations internally with staff, amongst the group, to say, really, where do we need to start to rebuild and get ourselves out of the cycle that I have gone over several times with the board and now with the council, and how do we begin that work? Notwithstanding your comments, Commissioner, around the victim services need, very, very, very important, obviously, and the staff that do work in that area do tremendous work. So, that's kind of the process that we started with, and began to look at how do we get back on track? How do we get out of the cycle? How do we get members back to work? Having said that, the decisions are difficult, and I think, Commissioner, you said that. Our request was for much more than we're presenting today. Our request was necessary, it was needed. We gave extensive rationale. And I also agree that conversations are important. That's why we do them. And conversations are going to continue, clearly, maybe after today and further with council. So those conversations and discussions and deliberations will continue, and we welcome them. We welcome them at all levels of the organization, and we encourage those conversations to continue at the board level, at the public level, at the council level, and we are regularly, always listening to what the public has to say. And don't want to get too quotey with Peel, but we can't do what we do without the public. Can't do what we do without the board. Can't do what we do without council. So we're all in this together. We're all part of a larger team to try to bring public safety to the Halifax Regional Municipality. So the other piece, just to go back to your point on victim services, you know, now that we have this revised, reduced amount that we're looking at, keeping in mind that the ask that we brought was necessary, important, required, and understanding the environment we live in, the fiscal responsibility that we're all required to pay attention to. We are going to embark, and we always do, on how do we move forward without the entire amount that we've asked for? Assessment of prioritization of services that are provided, and we have to look at all of that. So we'll continue to do that. The victim services request was not included in this ask based on all the information and the totality of the impact on the service. We're going to continue to monitor that particular situation as we move forward. We had another request in the area of freedom of information, required service, right? You haven't asked about that, but that is an also required service. One could argue not as important as victim services, but we do deliver on our victim services requirements, and we'll continue to assess how we move forward on that. We'll go on to the communicators, our dispatchers and our call takers. Very important frontline job in my view. They are at the front end, the pointy end of the stick, as it were, for those 911 calls that come in. Those calls are almost regularly traumatic. The call taker has to calm people down, has to get information, and they have to do that to get it to the dispatcher. So the dispatcher can get it to the units that are going to be responding to the calls. And then the dispatcher, in coordination with supervisors, their training, quality assurance, all those things, ensure that they do their part to help the officers stay safe on the street by providing information and coordination of where all the units are. There's more to it than that, but that's a little bit of a nutshell. So we really needed 8 full-time IES communicators. That's the ask that we had. We know that in the revised and reduced budget, we can't deliver on that. So we had to make a determination of what gets us and keeps us afloat currently. And just like we will with victim services, we'll go back and reassess the part that isn't included, which is the other full-timers. So the part-timers will help. It's not a solution, but it will help. It'll help offset. It'll help fill in some of the gaps. The supervisor / trainer position is there to address the need for quality assurance, the need for regular training, the need for project management of what might be coming ahead. There are some things in that area that are coming. And if we had the full-time, the 8 full-time members, we would have been able to provide that with the existing supervisory complement. Without the additional 8 full-time members, we can't provide it. So we have to kind of make sure that we do provide that. We know there's overlap. We're not only just dispatching for the police, we're dispatching for fire and the airport and others. So that's where we had to balance that particular aspect of reassigning. And again, very difficult task. We would have preferred to have the entire amount met and provided for, but it is a process. We're in an environment where we have to deliver efficient and effective policing. We understand it. The command team got together. We actually had input from across the organization on what was important. Chief, what about this? Chief, this is what we think is important. None of those decisions were made in isolation by me. They were made as a team. As far as response times, so as you know, Commissioner, I know you're well aware, we have a priority response model. And I have said since July of 2019 that what we need to do as an organization, which is many things, but primarily we need to be able to respond to the priority 1, 2, and 3 calls for service. And you can imagine the urgency is listed in that exact number, 1, 2, and 3. We're doing a lot of work in this area, which you know, and more to come on that at future meetings. But we have to make decisions every day on ensuring that we have the members that can respond to those calls. So we always get to priority 1s and 2s. We often don't get to priority 3s. It depends what's going on. It depends what the impacts are and what the priorities are in the street at the time. A homicide, a shooting, a major event that requires immediate police response. Sometimes things have to wait. But we do our very best to ensure that we get to them all, but always 1s and 2s. And how do we do that? We do that by displacing staff, by moving people around, providing backup. I won't go on too much about this because you've heard it. The displacement of our community response officers, the displacement of our school resource officers, the displacement of our traffic unit, back to the front line to support. And if they're not back to the front line to support, they're often pulled from their regular duties in those areas to support. Our community response and crime prevention unit also assists. So this happens on a regular basis to ensure that we're able to attend the required priority calls. And we'll do that work, the question that you asked, and we'll pull those calls and we'll have that discussion. It's an important one. And I think it's even more important that we provide an understanding for you to be able to continue to contribute to the conversation. And we very much look forward to it. And finally, the last way that we bring our staff in to make sure that we're meeting those calls for service and having the appropriate number of officers on the street to respond to those frontline calls is through call-ins. And that results in overtime, which we've talked about on numerous occasions. So I'll end it there, Commissioner, and open to any other questions you may have.
Thanks, Chief. Commissioner McDougall.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief, for your responses to those questions from Commissioner Critchley and Commissioner Kent. I am really kind of perplexed about the surplus from last year, which is about 1.5 million, and why you cannot have that going forward, which would actually equal this increase you're asking for, approximately. Can someone, maybe it isn't you, but somebody from finance kind of explain that in more detail? It would make absolute sense to me that that figure would continue to be available rather than just removed totally. So I leave that with you.
Maybe Bruce can answer that. And if not, I'll go to the chief or anyone in the room.
I can speak to that,
Oh,
Chair.
Jerry. Okay, great, Jerry. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Smith, and through you to Commissioner McDougall. Yeah, so any surplus that a business unit realizes at year end gets wound up basically into what we call a corporate surplus, and that money would be then allocated to reserves as per our charter and financial policies. So in the case of the HRP budget, when we put together, finance provides a target to all business units at the beginning of the budget cycle, we do take into account any surplus position for the current year. So with regard to HRP, we incorporated the surplus position for the current year in building their target for this coming year.
Commissioner McDougall?
I don't know, Bruce, if you wanted to comment on that as well.
Yeah, I think you're actually right. So I think the councillor is trying to understand why those funds, those savings in this year don't carry on through to next year. And I think if the chief can comment on this, but I believe that they fundamentally do, but the chief is adding on additional positions on top.
Chief, do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Thanks. I will, Chair, and I may have to call in Mr. Horton. I just want to clarify. Mr. Fisher, are you suggesting that that money does not go back to the municipality and it stays within our budget year over year?
Absolutely not. No,
I just didn't want to leave anybody with the wrong impression.
right. No. What I'm saying is that when you do your 22, presumably you have some savings which are structural in nature, which are going to carry on into 22, 23. All right. So that's, I think, fundamentally what we're saying. We built that into your envelope. So you've absorbed those savings within your costs. However, you have asked for additional services and positions above that envelope. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief.
No, I appreciate that. And yeah, that's true. This is, what I would call transparency in action here, accounting for all the money and, potential projections. Mr. Horton just did a third quarter report to the board to let them know where we were at, the reasons for the surplus, what's included in there. He is here today. We're happy to go through them again if we haven't answered the question of Commissioner McDougall.
I'll just comment because it sounds like it makes sense in some ways, but to someone outside the system, when you see that there's a budget surplus and then to hear what Jerry Blackwood just said was that the surplus was in fact built into, or I don't know, did you use the word baked into? Built into what you were asked to come back to council with, Chief. So in other words, the amount you were given by council included that surplus. But I find that sort of interesting because the total amount that you were given by council is in fact less than last year. It is to me confusing, and I just think that approach, kind of good management, is not rewarded by getting that money back into your budget. It actually, in fact, looks like you're expected to do less with a budget that because you managed well last year. I don't know if I'm making absolute sense, but that's how I interpret that.
I'll ask Jerry.
So thanks, Commissioner, and through you, Chair. Mr. Horton is up beside me now, and we can, if it's valuable, have him go over a little bit of information, hopefully to supplement and clarify and maybe remove some of the ambiguity. And then perhaps Mr. Blackwood or Mr. Fisher could also weigh in. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Horton.
Thank you, Chief. Chair, through you to the board member, to the commissioner. I'm going to repeat a lot of what I think was already said, but try to help with the explanation. So every year we establish an operating budget. We were provided some fiscal framework, as Jerry has indicated in the past.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. There we go.
I guess I was muted there. I'll start over. Chair, through you to the board member. I'm going to repeat a little bit of what I think others have said, Jerry and Bruce, but tried to provide a little more explanation on this matter. So every year we establish an operating budget and provided some criteria and priorities. The target is established through fiscal framework discussion that establishes a potential tax rate that council approves, and that's how we receive an established target for HRP. When we're, for example, for this year, the budget target was reduced based on the established tax rate that they wanted. So it went down. The target number was 980,000 less than the current fiscal year. A lot, set that aside, we also do forecasting throughout the year to track our costs and see if we're staying on the established budget, or if we need to forecast what those adjustments are and why and how much. When we do those forecasting, we're also looking at how those adjustments will impact future budgets. Are they adjustments or forecasting that's going to result in longer lasting that we can build into a future budget? So the surplus we're experiencing this year, a lot of it was on the revenue side of things for the 911 call transfers. We saw an increase in the fee and the amount of calls coming in, so that resulted in revenue coming in that was more than what we initially anticipated in the budget. We factored that into the budget we established for the proposed budget we established for next year. Another one was with the WCD recoveries that we receive when we have people that are off. That number grew more than what we initially anticipated as the budget amount. We took that in consideration when developing the proposed budget for 22-23. A lot of those increases in those recoveries and revenues helped to absorb the decrease in our budget from year to year. I hope that helped explain some of it. The service enhancements that the chief has discussed and proposed are all above the target number that was established for police. We made the adjustments when necessary to reach the target number, but however, we need additional funds for the service enhancements. I don't know if that helps explain the answer, provide an explanation to that question.
Thanks everybody on that one. We're past time, but if you had something quick, Commissioner McDougall, I'll let you. Okay. Next, Commissioner Kemp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is on the same vein, and I just want to make sure that this is how I'm looking at it from this lens around the surplus and the ask. The surplus is part of a standardized practice that we put in place for savings and for, in this case, revenue that was not expected to be as high, and if that's something to be visited, perhaps, and that would be part of council, I think, consideration as well, and that's a future discussion. This ask, I feel compelled to remind folks, this ask, and certainly the one I supported, which was a larger ask, is really about it's about not having to spend money on overtime and asking other members, current service members, to come and pick up the service that is lost when we have people off. We have people off for a number of reasons, not to I guess to put a highlight to. A lot of it is, the PTSD and the impact of the kind of work that they do. And this ask is about the board endorsing and council endorsing that the chief and his team have the ability to bring on new members so that we are not overtaxing those that are still in service and potentially approaching a point of which they might actually be off. We don't want our members, our serving members of our police services, to be in that position. And if these officers are needed, it's about that. Not to me, that the two are not aligned because of process. And one is, even if the chief had more money in his budget, I think and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe Marty, this is something that you can answer, is it's still an expectation that the chief would come with a budget that assigns the directive that he is thinking is the best position allocation of money to serve our public in the highest capacity that it can. So this is, to me, this is what's on the table. And I don't know if I'm making sense or not, but I just want to make sure that people are thinking it through that way. That this is, even if the money was there, he still should show us where he's going to spend it. And in this case, the money's not, it's there, but it's backfilled the reduction in general. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I felt compelled to say it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chief, did you have any comments?
Just through you, Chair, and to the Commissioner. Good synopsis, and appreciate that. It is a lot of that, and I don't want to go on too much because I've mentioned it a few times. What we're really trying to do is we're trying to change the course.
Mhm.
So we're on a course, and Commissioner Kent, you summed it up. We're on a course where people are exhausted, people are overworked, they're overtasked. We're on a course where we're not providing support services to the community through our community response officers in the capacity that the community has become accustomed to. In the capacity of our school resource officers, I'll just mention those two. I won't even go into traffic. Those two particular support areas are integral to community development, police community relations, all those kind of things, which most of us are aware of. Going back to the priorities of the organization, Commissioner Critchley mentioned it, those priority calls. How are we getting to those priority calls? What's the process to ensure that we have the staff to get there? And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to break the cycle. We've heard the term many times, and it's not just related to what I've described to you since December 13th, but it's in many things. And the time to break the cycle, is now. Now we have an opportunity. Very reasonable, I would say. Very well presented, I would say. And we need to make some changes. And Commissioner Blackburn mentioned about mechanical speed enforcement, mechanical traffic light enforcement. Those things are behavior changing for sure. They're a little bit away, right? And we're going to keep doing our job. Our traffic unit is going to keep doing the great job that they are doing. And when those things come into operation, we're going to embrace it. We're going to work with the municipality. We're going to work with the province and see where we can make changes there. But fundamentally, to your point, Commissioner Kent, we have to break the cycle. This is going to help us do that. This is not going to be the solution. There's many aspects. We haven't just said, and it's been said a few times, I don't agree with throwing bodies at it. We're not throwing bodies at it. We are asking for some additional help through human resources, through frontline resources, so we can break the cycle. But we're working on reintegration of our members. We're working with, health and wellness. We're trying to make sure that people have the supports they need. And it isn't just one thing. And if it was, the ask would be higher. I think I've articulated that to you. We're trying to take an informed, reasonable approach to be the most efficient and effective that we can. And Commissioner Kent, I do appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Blackburn.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just sort of want to perhaps follow up on what Commissioner McDougall said, and hopefully, Bruce, if you're still there, you can help me with this, because God only knows I got into radio because I wasn't good at math. And I think it's something that we've heard Bruce say time and time again, that a surplus is not something that you would use on ongoing items. I think Mr. Horton has sort of outlined that the vast majority of the surplus that was realized this year was done just because of a few sort of one-time issues. So we can't always count on having that kind of surplus. The budget process that we follow at council sometimes is, when we get a surplus, we might spend that or direct that the surplus be used on one-time only items. So there isn't an ongoing cost, whereas, everything that's being presented to us today would be ongoing costs. And so, as general good practice, you wouldn't use a surplus to help fund those. Am I even close to reality, Bruce?
I think you're very much in reality. I think maybe where we're getting a bit confused is between, we have a surplus in 21, 22 because costs were lower. We're not going to use that surplus to fund police. But when we go forward, we're going to look at those lower costs and make sure we include those lower costs in future budgets if they're ongoing. So that's what I think we're all trying to say here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You, Commissioner. Okay, before we go to second round, just a couple quick questions from myself. So I'll save comments until my last go, but some clarification pieces. So just on the surplus question, and just to kind of simplify it, hopefully for me and maybe other folks it might help. When we're looking at the surplus through HRP, because there are still additional asks that are outside the envelope, you wouldn't per se be able to put that surplus onto the current ask, because that surplus wouldn't be used for items that are, and I might not be saying it right, but items that would be used outside of what the envelope that was given for our current budget. Is that how it works? And that's why we have this chief couldn't just go and use that surplus and put it onto bodies, because this is outside the envelope, which means that he'd still have to come and ask for that additional money.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So just to try to provide some clarity around the surplus. So when we built the target for HRP, the surplus that police were projecting for the current year was $1.5 million. The last update to the board, which was last month, I think that surplus is around $1.3 million now. So the surplus is basically, as Mr. Horton said, it's money they haven't spent, or money from increases in revenue, right? So that funding would at the end of the year, as I said before, that funding goes into corporate savings. That can't be carried forward. And to Councillor Blackburn's point, sometimes we use surplus or withdraw from reserves for one-time items. So in terms of our charter, our legislation, and our finance rules, any surplus delivered at the end of the year needs to go in, it goes to our reserves, right? So, that when we built the target, we included those savings in that target when it was designed. The additional service enhancements, where the disconnect is the additional service enhancements came back to the Board of Police Commissioners after the target was developed. And I think that is relevant for the board, because I think you're struggling with why was the service enhancements not in a target. So that is where the disconnect is in terms of that. And that is, a lot of that is around the governance of how the police deliver their budget, right? Their budget is tabled at the Board of Police Commissioners first. It's not tabled through the normal process at council. So when we, Bruce and I and Tyler, brought the fiscal framework forward, which gives council gives general direction on a tax rate, right? These service enhancements had not even been tabled at the Board of Police Commissioners. So that's where we have this disconnect, right? And so I hope that's not confusing the issue more. I'm hoping it will clarify it. So
and that's kind of where I wanted you to go, just to make that a little bit more clear for folks on that. Because when we think as surplus, we're like, oh, I just saved some money, let me spend it somewhere else. As just regular folks, where it's a little different when we're talking about how HRM and organizations and whatnot. So I think what you just did kind of help a little bit there. So thank you. So Chief, related to what you brought forward today, so I like, and you talked about it a little bit. But this is new, the emergency response communicator supervisor. So understanding that the emergency response communicators, it's in brackets, so I just want to get clear. It says 1.5 FTE, 3 part-time. So is that 4 positions? Is that 4 people? Or is that one, or is that considered one person with 3 people?
So Chair, if I'm following along and through you to the board, it's 4 positions, three bodies, okay?
Right.
4, it's not 4 positions because 3 of them are part-time. So we have a part-timer pool, and these 3 individuals would join the part-timer pool. We have 1 full-time position, and then those part-timers would be used to supplement the request for 8 additional full-times, 2 per watch. We'll spread them out. They'll get hours. Right now, it's based on a 20-hour work week. They may be called upon to do more. It depends what the need is. The full-time ask for the supervisor/trainer is to help us with those activities that on the shift or on the watch supervisors would have been doing if we had the additional 8 full-time people, so 2 per watch, because that would have freed up the supervisor on the watch to do quality assurance, to fill in for supervisory needs, to do any necessary training, those kind of things. So this is kind of where we're at based on the money that we have, based on the budget, and how do we still get the job done to the extent that we can. And I don't want to give the impression that those four individuals are going to fill the 8 full-time people that we asked for. That isn't the case, but it will help. And then we'll reevaluate and then see where we go. Whether we look at other what services can we provide to bring in there? No different than the other commissioner's question around victim services. Those dialogue and discussion will continue. So I hope that's helpful.
Yep. So just to follow up on that, and then I have one more question. So related to the emergency response communicator supervisor, so right now, would a watch commander be the one who'd be supervising those, and like who currently supervises those individuals? And does this position allow that current person to do other duties, and that's why you need a person that's specifically focusing on that?
Yeah, I'm going to say kind of.
Okay.
So, and it's a good question. It's a good question, Chair. So let me just see if I can provide some context. And if I don't give you what you're looking for, I have Inspector Robertson here as well.
Okay.
So he's all things IES, and he'll be able to help me out. So just for some context, each watch has 2 supervisors assigned full time, and those supervisors primarily do supervisory duties. And but what happens from time to time, as I have previously mentioned, is we don't fill all the seats in the dispatch arena. So then occasionally, or more than occasionally, and what I'll do is I'll just ask Inspector Robertson to come up and just be ready. More than occasionally, a supervisor will have to sit in the dispatch arena chair and dispatch calls. When that happens, the supervisor is not there to look after the rest of the dispatch staff, whether it be call takers or otherwise. And so they're distracted doing this other work. Hence the ask for, and it doesn't just happen on one watch, it happens on all the watches. We also have the issue of having to call in dispatchers, call takers to make sure that we have enough people in the seats covered on a regular basis so the work can get done. Really, it comes down to business continuity within the area. This position, the full-time supervisor/trainer will be working primarily day shifts. They will look after training and supervisory needs during that time. And if there needs to be some covering off, they will. The other piece they will also do is the quality assurance piece. And I'll let Inspector Robertson talk a little bit about that, and then be available for other projects that might come down the road. Next Gen 911, the TMR upgrade, those kind of things. And I'm not an expert in either one of them to be able to give you any context, but we can get that for you if you need. And then additionally, the 3 part-timers will be used to supplement on the watches whether it be days or nights, to come in and fill those gaps that otherwise might be left for occupational health and stress injuries that might occur, vacations, illness, the other types of leave that people are entitled to as part of their work. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll just ask Inspector Robertson to maybe top us up a little bit on the quality assurance piece or anything else.
I don't want to, sorry, really quickly, Inspector, I don't want to take your time to shine, but that helped me. My question's been answered. If you want to speak, you can, but that answered my question. So sorry to take your time to shine, Inspector. I just really, really quickly, I just want to get to the next one because I know I'm actually pretty much over time. But if somebody else wants to follow up with it, I'm sure you'll be ready to jump on it. Really quickly, the other one that I just want to get clarification on the process-wise is I heard that there were some concerns from members, commissioners, around certain positions that have been put in the budget. So just for process, if commissioners wanted, for example, say they didn't support the 12 full-time patrols and they wanted to do 6 and cut it in half and then add another position, I don't believe we can do that in this process, or can we? I just want the clarification before we start to get into making decisions, because everybody already spoke first. What is the commission able to do in terms of changes today? And I don't know if that's maybe Marty.
Chair Smith, I would ask that Marty provide input on that, if that's all right.
Yeah, I'm just looking who else is. Yeah, I guess Marty would be the one.
Thank you, Chair. There's a the way it is set up is that the chief produces a budget, puts it in front of you, and I guess to deliver the services the best way he thinks he can and what he needs. The board reviews that budget, and I would suggest in all aspects, right, against what they're supposed to be doing in terms of the act, their functions under the act, their jurisdiction, to see if what he's proposing is consistent, aligns with that, right? And that could mean, any type of expenses. The board then refers that on to council, okay? And then council really does two things. Under the bylaw, council approves a global amount for the budget, right? And they've done that, right? And they can either accept or reject the global amount that's put forward by the board. The other thing council can do is it's under the act, under the police act, it's council that determines what the complement of the police force should be. How many bodies, what type of bodies, council does that, right? But in doing that, I'd suggest that the board also suggests that to council, and council effectively holds the hammer on what that should be, right? So I would suggest council is looking to the board for its advice, not only on the global figure for the budget, but also how that budget should be composed, including the FTEs, the complement. Does that help?
Yeah, so again, just for process wise, if members, commissioners wanted to make changes to the budget, we would have to send the budget back and the chief would have to then come back again, or can that happen today?
No, no, the chief would not have to come back.
Okay.
The board, that's at the discretion of the board, right? The board could, for example, say the chief, we're happy with this, or we think there should be an adjustment here, but we want you to go back and have another look at something and come back to us, or alternatively, the board could make its own change in the recommendation going forward. Either way.
Got you. Okay.
The important thing, what the board's required to do under the bylaw is consult with the chief. Okay. Consult with the chief or the delegate, and consult also with the representative of the CAO, which would be Jerry or someone else. So so you're really at a consultative process at this point, right? But having made that consultation, then you go forward to council. Does that help?
Yep. All right. Oops, I muted myself, sorry. So as we go to second round, I hope that makes it clear for folks as we move forward. So I have on my list Commissioner Critchley, then Commissioner Kent, and then Commissioner Blackburn. So Commissioner Critchley.
Mr. Chair, I have actually a question on Marty's
Oh, yeah,
clarification
sure.
of what Marty
Yep.
said.
Yep.
I want to stay on the second list. But
No, that's
Marty,
fine.
just
This is a good time.
just so I understand, because I know these are kinds of questions were asked during council. Because council came back with a new amount, this board has no ability to increase that amount and go back to them unless we delay and unless it really extends the whole thing. Is it a mandate of this board now that we must stay within that envelope, or obviously less?
Well, the answer to
Matter
that, all right, through the chair to you, yes, Commissioner Kent, the answer is a practical one, right? So you could go back with an increased figure to council, and then council could send it back to you again and again and again and again and again, right? So as a practical matter, the global figure that council's established is an indication of what they're prepared to approve, right? So so the board should, I would suggest, be working within that figure.
Yeah, I'll save my comments on that perspective for my second round.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Well, Chair Smith, I'd be happy, Commissioner Kent, if you want to go ahead, and I'll speak after you where you've already speaking.
Sure, if the chair is open to that, I'm fine with that. And so I guess my perspective is in relation to what's on the table now. And of course what Marty said, and that, you know, as a council, it was debated, and lots of questions were asked, and it was based on the full extent of the ask. No surprises to anyone here. I supported that. I still would support that. And because I think that we have a good rationale for it, I look forward to potential changes in the future. We haven't got there yet. We've got a lot of work to do as a board, as a commission, and with the public. Which I know, and I feel confident that our chief and his team are going to be at those tables, but there's a lot to do there. In respect to the council decision, a single motion was put on the floor and picked an amount. And if we as a group here today think that we're not quite right, maybe we should add one more FTE for the chief, or maybe another piece to this. If we thought that our rationale was strong, we could go back to council. And there's always the debate that really kind of pulls it together. I'm not going to suggest that today, because I also feel like we've got to make a decision. The chief has come back. He's given us an option, a way forward. Although I respect and wish that we would consider something greater, I'm not sure that we have the votes at this table, because we barely got the first one through by one vote. We only have 5. So I'm taking the position at this moment that the full extent of this motion is better than going backwards. And I'm hedging my bets on that. I still believe in the first vote that I offered up and the first motion, but that's where I sit today. But I wanted clarification so that all board members would understand what was discussed at council, how we got there, and what my position is and what my view is on. To me, the risk is higher that we not deal with this today. I don't want to put that back on the table and continue to volley this around. It's too important. Thank you. So I'll be supporting the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Marty, is that a new hand? Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to get rid of the hand. Okay. I just wanted to be clear about what Commissioner Kent had asked. There are 2 pieces of things operating here. If you look at the act The act says that the board is supposed to submit a budget to council. It doesn't say any more than that, just submit it to council. And then the bylaw says that council can only exercise budget approval either to approve what's submitted, right, or refer it back with a global amount. So those are the two things, and everything else we're talking about is in between those two things, right? So if that helps, there's nothing that says the act does not say if council refers it back, then the board does this or the board does that, right? Okay, it just says the board submits the budget to council, and it says council can approve or not approve a global amount. That's it.
Thanks, Marty.
Thank you.
Did you want to follow up, Commissioner Kent?
No, I think that
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Pritchett.
Thank you, Chair Smith. I just want a quick point of clarification, maybe from Ian, before I provide some comments. And I know I've gotten clarification about this before, but if I bring an amendment, can I do that in addition to my comments, or would I have to do so in the time allotted to me?
So if you bring an amendment, you then get new time.
Okay.
So you can speak if you want. You can speak for your time, your 3 minutes now, and then if you want to bring the amendment after you're done speaking, then you'll have a new 5-minute time.
Okay, I appreciate that. I thank you for the clarification. And I want to thank the chief for answering my questions and the other commissioners for asking their questions. I guess I want to come back to the first question I asked the chief, which was this point around, when you're comparing apples and oranges, what's the basis on which you're doing that? What's the evidence? And I know I keep coming back to this point around evidence, but I think it's really, really important. And it's important for a reason that Marty picked up on really clearly. The board's role is consultative. So the operational information rests with the chief, but the decision-making rests with the board. And that's, the basic structure of democratic policing in a constitutional democracy, that we have this idea of civilian governance of the police. So the operational information, like I said, is with the chief, and we need it in order to make informed decisions. And I would suggest that making informed decisions, making evidence-based decisions, is actually in keeping with our statutory duties under the Police Act. So we have a duty, as Marty has mentioned, to ensure that the budget proposal complies with our duties under the Act. And our duties under the Act include ensuring that policing priorities, and I would suggest that the budget reflects policing priorities, reflect community values. And we know from HRP, strategic plan documents, HRM documents, that evidence-based decision-making is a core value of the HRM. And it's one that I know in our work plan session last year was highlighted by a number of commissioners. And so I guess I'm making a comment that I appreciate the chief's point about, look, it takes, when I ask for information, especially when I'm asking for year-over-year comparisons, it takes time to get that information. And I fully appreciate that. So I want to say that partly these comments are directed towards future budget years. But when I compare the budget proposal, for example, that was presented for Halifax Fire, and I want to say first and foremost that there are extremely important differences between fire and police. They're very, very different services. But I felt like, as a civilian, as a member of the community, I could read that budget proposal and understand where the ask came from, right? So I see, for instance, on page 24 of the Halifax Fire budget, there's a point that says that they have a target of 90% in terms of their reaching their response times. For urban fires, that's on scene in 8 minutes. For urban medical calls, that's on scene in 7.5 minutes. And they provided the year-over-year data as to those response times. And again, I'm not here trying to beat up on the chief or suggest that he needs to provide this information right now. But in understanding this problem of understaffing, which I concede is a real problem, we've been provided that data. I've sought to understand what is the impact of this issue, not only internally on the force, not only as it relates to our community response officers and our school liaison officers, but fundamentally as it relates to public safety in the HRM. We've heard from Commissioner Kent and Commissioner Blackburn in particular, comments around risk, and we don't want to take risks, but we need to have sufficient information in order to understand the magnitude of risks, right? And again, this comes back to this point around comparing apples and oranges. What's the magnitude of risk associated with the caseload for a victim services worker being too high or not being able to allot sufficient time to working with a victim, such that there's antecedent consequences or harms that flow from that? How do we compare that risk to other risks? I think it's my understanding that patrol is not an integrated unit, and I'd be happy for the chief to correct me, but if I just wouldn't mind finishing first, and that for that reason, the point around 209 officers per 100,000 population, the second highest in Canada behind Montreal, would apply to patrol. So again, there's a lot of for me, there's some outstanding pieces of information and some questions. Not to blame the chief for not providing those all today. I am suggesting that in future budget years, I will, strongly require to feel sufficient in discharging my duties that we have that information. But I'm not going to be able to support the budget as is without that information as it relates to patrol, because I don't feel like I'm well positioned to compare the different asks as they relate to civilian and sworn positions. And I'm going to bring an amendment to that effect. But so I'm going to end my comments there, if that's okay.
Thank you.
So
that was right on cue. So Chief, if you have any comments.
yeah, just a couple. Thank you, Chair, and through you to the Commissioner and the Commission. So I won't, get too much into the differences between police and fire. And I will ask Inspector Robertson to comment a little bit on Commissioner Critchley's comments around fire response time. And what I would say is that, they are very different comparators as far as KPIs go. Fire has, and I'm not speaking on behalf of fire, certain requirements around the number of firefighters on a truck, depending on the type of truck. Certain number of firefighters that need to be positioned within a particular station. Certain number of fire stations as it relates geographically to the communities that they serve. As the police, we are on patrol 24/7, responding to calls for service in a reactive mode and certainly in a proactive mode. So I'll leave it at that. I'll come back after Inspector Robertson brings a couple comments, and then I'll sum up.
Okay, thanks, Chief. So the only thing I would add is part of the ask for the supervisor who's going to be detailed to business hour work and doing the quality assurance. They're looking at those fire calls. They're looking at the police calls. So in particular for the fire calls, they're looking at the POMAX references, what was suggested there to look at the dispatch time, how much time it takes to take the call from the call taker, get it out to the appropriate fire station and designate the appropriate assets and monitor that call from the beginning to the end. So that work, that analysis of a fire call, it's not taking place because we simply don't have the staff that can be detailed to take care of the points that was raised in the previous POMAX recommendation. So we've had discussions with the IES governance board, which HRFE is part of, and we're totally transparent that work's not getting done because we have our frontline staff detailed to positions. They're unable to do it. The supervisors are backfilling when there's a shortage to meet the minimum amount of persons that need to be in seats to take care of all the different dispatching that occurs for all the different divisions, RCMP and fire. So that work is important, and it does give fire some reference to how the call is being handled, and we can further evaluate how we can increase that service to the fire department. And those discussions are ongoing at our IES governance meeting. So definitely this position, working daytime, can evaluate the calls for service, fire and police, and for RCMP.
Thank you.
And just a quick follow-up on that, Chair, if I could, and just in response to some of the commissioners' other points. When we talk about the operations of the police service. The board, the municipality, they entrust me and my team to deliver on the operations piece. The board has a very important role to play in the governance piece, and these discussions and dialogues and questions and answers are exceedingly important. And we'll continue to get that information and have that discussion with the board, and with the community and with all of our stakeholders. The other piece, and I know Commissioner Pritchett is very passionate about the victim services position. And one of the things for consideration, and Councillor Kent brought it up and kind of touched on it. Board and Commissioner Pritchett could certainly bring a motion forward to add the victim services position to the ask for very important reasons and very good reasons. Alternatively, I said earlier when I was responding to the commissioner's initial questions, we're going to go back and look and see from a service delivery perspective, what can we do differently to see where we can deliver on the other asks that we had along with victim services, whether it be freedom of information. How can we better provide traffic support to the municipality? All of those kind of things. So we do that on a regular basis. We'll continue to have the dialogue with the board, important, necessary dialogue, and we look forward to it.
Thank you, Chief. Commissioner Pritchett, you said you had an amendment to put forward?
Yeah, but I'm happy though for Commissioner Blackburn or Commissioner Kent if they want to ask some follow-up questions before I do that.
So, Commissioner Blackburn, if you want to speak for a second time, you haven't spoken for a second time yet, or Commissioner McDougall, Commissioner Kent, you have gone twice, but if you have something quick, I'd be happy to let you ask it.
No, I'm good. I've spoken twice, actually. Remember, I put the motion on the floor and then
okay,
spoke.
You're right.
So
Yeah, you're right.
No,
Sorry to put you on the spot there, Commissioner Black.
No, no worries.
Said your name. Was that maybe, okay, my mistake.
Yeah, and then
no,
Commissioner
all
Kent,
good.
Commissioner Kent, if you have a quick question, sure, you
Yeah, I just have a follow-up to this dialogue, because I certainly as well commend Commissioner Critchley for his diligence and willingness to continue to pursue the whole data information piece, which is a really, really important piece for us. I get that, but I really also want to articulate, and I've seen it so many times, that data does not always tell the whole story. We have asked Chief Kinsella and our RCMP chiefs to lead our service, and with that comes more than just data. If we had to rely on data every time for instance, within our women's movement and making advances, we would never have the data to support the gains that we have, because it takes effort to get there. If we relied on data for domestic violence advancements and how we support the women that are experiencing it and the families that are experiencing, there is more to every scenario. And I think when I think about the chief and what he's got at play in his executive team, all of the factors that some of the factors we can collect data on, but we can't necessarily anticipate all the pressures that come with that he has to consider and his team have to consider, trying to project where they need to go. And I think this scenario of stemming the tide of where our FTE complement is going is a perfect scenario of this. He couldn't have predicted specifically the amount of pressures that are on our officers right now, the impact of more morale, promotion and leadership opportunities, and right now situational pressures like COVID and global pressures like we're now seeing in other parts of the country. We have an expectation of our chiefs to have that capacity, but that's not data he's going to be able to provide. But we have to as well consider things beyond our data, consider what's happening around us, what are the conversations that are happening and around potentially on police service models, and that's our job. to go and be part of those conversations while Chief and his team deliver the service based on what we know right now and what his team is anticipating could potentially come in the future. We're not going to be able to predict that only by way of data. So again, I'm throwing that out there because I think these are important things to mention during these debates. Thank you.
Commissioner McDougall, did you have anything before I go to Commissioner Pritchett? I can't.
Not at this time.
Okay, Commissioner Pritchett.
Thank you, Chair Smith, and thank you, Commissioner Kent. Of course, I hope I wasn't taken as suggesting that all sorts of decisions were reducible to data, or that all sorts of things could be predicted in advance. But just to say that generally, when making decisions, it's good to have a standard to compare things against, and that more evidence and more data is usually, not always, but usually better than fewer. Not to suggest that that's not being the case here, and I think to maybe some of the chief's points and about distinguishing fire and police, I did initiate that comparison by saying I concede there are important differences between these services. But again, as a general model, like I think as I said on January 31st, one thing that we heard from a large number of members of the public, and I can pull up my notes and list off their names, there was a dozen or more. One thing that we heard from members of the public was that they did not feel as though they were receiving sufficient evidence on the basis of that they, as members of the public, could feel comfortable, as taxpayers in the municipality, supporting the service in the direction it was going. Of course, the chief is appointed to be the operational lead for everything related to the HRP, and I've got complete trust in him. But again, part of this relates as well to our role as being a conduit for the community, right? Ensuring that members of the public feel that the evidence is there and that decisions are being made in an evidence-based way, right? So part of this isn't always so much about, is there a rationale, but can it be seen and is it perceived by the public that there's a rationale? And I think I wouldn't want to speak for other commissioners, but in light of some of the comments that we're getting from members of the public, both negative and positive, there is amongst some a disconnect in terms of the evidence that's available to the public and the evidence that's otherwise available to councillors. And sure, there's safety and security concerns, and and I'm going to bring a motion next month to try and drill down more clearly and get some more guidance as to when exactly do things need to be in private, right? What is a security concern? But part of this is about discharging our duties to the public as well. So that's just sort of that final point. But so the amendment that I'm going to make is, I think, basically in keeping with what we've been hearing. I suggest that it's a very strong middle ground. It can help to start breaking the cycle, as we've heard. It can also fill some important civilian positions. So what I'm going to be proposing is an amendment that would allow for 8 patrol officers, 1 hate crime detective, 1 reintegration constable, the original 4 ERC positions, and the victim services position, for a total of 1,233,833 $. So it's a reduction of about $100,000. But again, I think it's an important middle road. It starts to fill some of that backlog as it relates to patrol. It fills the victim service position, which I think I've highlighted as being very important. It fills a number of those ERC positions in a more fulsome way. We've heard about some of the trauma and the burnout experienced by those people, and the essential role that they play as a member of the team in terms of dispatching and responding to calls. So I think in a more fulsome way, it addresses that concern. And then it also provides for both the reintegration constable, which we've seen as, and I mean, that's an example, right? I'm fully happy to support that because we received some evidence, that this is being used in Edmonton and that's been effective. So again, I'm not a punitive person. I want to see things that are done in an effective way. Where there's evidence from evidence that's effective, that's great. I'd like to see it come to fruition. And then, of course, the piece around the hate crime detective. I think that's very important. That's been in keeping with what we're hearing from members of the public. So that's the amendment that I'm going to put forward.
Thank you. And we was asked if you can put that in the chat, if you don't mind. In the seconder, is there a seconder for that?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Blackburn, for the second. Commissioner Christie put it in the chat. So just really quickly, just for folks who don't have access to the chat. So the motion would include 8 positions for patrol, 1 hate crime, which would be the hate crime unit detective constable, the 1 reintegration member reintegration pilot program constable, the 4 ERCs, emergency response communicators. And just to get clarity, those would be the full-time positions, yeah. Mr. Christie, okay, full-time. 1 victim services, which is a victim services caseworker, in total $1,233,833.
Oh, and I will say, just to close out my remarks, that I'm welcome to any amendments that the other commissioners might bring, and I'll fully and fairly consider them.
Thank you. And you said you had the difference. What was the difference that you calculated?
Oh, if you give me 1 second, I can calculate it.
Okay, great. So I'll just let whoever is up next. Oh, I see the chief. You have your hand up. Sure, chief. You can jump in while he calculates that, and you can just throw it in the chat, Commissioner Pritchett.
Thanks, Chair, and through you to the commission. And I may ask Mr. Ward to come in at the end of this. So my understanding is that, and we've had the discussion, we've had the dialogue. My understanding is that the Board of Police Commissioners can adjust the amount of money. I'm not of the understanding that the board can advise on how resources are selected operationally. Happy to have that conversation, and I would ask Mr. Ward to weigh in, because what I'm understanding is that Commissioner Critchley is changing the proposal that we have come up with as an organization to meet the operational needs of the Halifax Regional Police. So I just wanted to add that in there, because I think we may have further dialogue around the Act, the interpretation of the Act, how governance should be governing, operation should be operation. Again, happy to have the conversation. I believe that we have had that, but this is a very important distinction, and I don't know that the motion is in order. So I would just ask Mr. Ward to come.
And before you speak, Marty, just as you're speaking on that point too, I wonder, because these are over budget enhancements that are not included in the standard operational budget, does that change any of how we interpret the Act as well? So just that be good clarity as well, because these items are not part of the general budget that we're looking to approve. So just I think that would help provide some clarity as well.
Okay. I don't think it does. I'm going to repeat what I said before, what I said earlier, and that is that the board, the chief produces a budget in consultation with the board. This is a consultative process that's going on right now, right? The board's responsibility is to look at that budget as presented and look at what the board's obligations are under the Act and make a recommendation in terms of a budget to council, okay? Part of that recommendation, it can include a number of things. Part of that can be the number of people and the composition of the people that are required to deliver those services and meet what the board considers to be its functions under the Act, right? Then council, when it goes to council, right? When it goes to council, then council will make the ultimate decision as to the complement. So, and that could mean the types of positions that are there, the number of positions that are there. The Police Act, it's a matter within the Act the section of the act gives gives council the ultimate control over the composition of the board, right? Sorry, of the force. Does that help?
Sorry, I was muted. So the overarching question is this motion out of order?
I do not think that the motion is out of order.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Because
So,
council will decide two things when this goes forward.
Right.
Council will decide, one, the global amount, right?
Mhm.
Whether they accept that, or alternatively, council will also decide what the complement is, right?
Okay.
Council may disagree. Council may accept the global amount when it goes there, and council may disagree with the complement, right?
So just to get clarity before I go to the next person. So if, just on that point, so when the chief would then go to council, say this motion passes, and with the positions that have been agreed upon through the commission, is the chief still able to go to council and say, even though the commission put forward these recommendations, this is what I've asked for, and then council can then say, actually, thanks commission for your input and your recommendations, but we're going with the chief's budget.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's...
Chief could make the same case on that amount. He could say that the amount could come forward from the board, and council could council could kind of decide on that amount, and council could decide on what that composition could be. So the chief could say to council, no, I don't, for operational reasons, I don't, this is what I need, and what's being suggested by the board does not work with me, and council could then decide what they think is appropriate. Yes.
Okay. So
that's their power under the act.
Got you. So really quickly before I go to you, back to you, Christy, just because this is very helpful. So if this motion that's on the floor passes today with the amount that's highlighted in the motion, the chief would then, if he doesn't agree, would then be presenting two budgets. So one would be his budget that he's presented today at the commission, and presenting the commission recommendations as well.
The budget that comes forward, the act requires that the budget come forward from the board. Okay.
Right. So, okay. So I don't want to interrupt, but just to make it so that the chief would be presenting the board's budget, but he would come with his recommendations to council. Even though the budget that has been presented is from the commission, he still would come forward with his recommendations under the money that was allocated by council.
Yeah, because the practice, it's the practice that's developed. The legislation requires the board to present the budget after consultation, right? The bylaw requires the board and the chief and the CAO to get together to talk about the budget. When it comes forward as a matter of practice, it's been presented the way that other business units are presented, right? But the legislation actually requires the board. So the chief in effect and the CAO are presenting the budget on behalf of the board in effect, right?
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. So thank you, Marty, for that. And Chief, I'll go and come back to you if you have any follow-up in a minute. Commissioner Pritchett.
Yeah, I don't want to have a big legal argument with Marty about this point. I appreciate, his perspective that the motion is in order. I guess I have kind of 2 points. The first is that, as many members know, I've been in the last kind of year on the board really concerned with, the governance of the board, and I've done this in a number of different ways. We've had the first ever public consultation on the budget. That's in keeping with our duties. But one other piece, and this relates to a legal opinion that came from legal services, is about perception of conflict of interest as it relates to legal services advising both the board and the HRP as a business unit of the HRM. And I want to say two things to that point. So the legal opinion didn't identify any real conflict of interest, but identified possible instances where there could be perceptions of conflict of interest. And the two that were identified as being the most acute, right? And by most acute, I mean the most serious in terms of the potential to lose public confidence. One was relating to issues the board's jurisdiction. And the second was relating to potential disputes that arose between the board as an independent entity and the HRM or any business unit of the HRM. And so I guess what I'm just kind of wondering a little bit about this secondary point about, well, you know, the budget comes from us, but then, you know, there's this other piece. And I don't know necessarily whether that's in keeping with 53, 1 through 3 of the Police Act, which, so the board shall cause the chief to prepare a budget. The board shall ensure the budget prepared is consistent with our duties. And then once the budget is prepared, we'll submit the budget to council. So I'm happy for Mr. Ward to provide more input on this, and if he wouldn't mind. But maybe Commissioner Kent, just to your point, I would suggest this would be relevant just because we're trying to get an understanding here of process, particularly as it relates to the legislation and kind of where things move forward, and perhaps where this is the first time something like this has happened. Even though it's maybe a bit tangential, it would be valuable to have the conversation if that's all right.
Yeah, and just on that point, Commissioner Pritchett, I'm going to give a little bit of latitude on folks speaking because this is a different way that approaching the budget. So I'm going to go to Marty, and then I'll go to the chief afterwards. So Marty, if you want to provide any just future further clarification.
I don't want to get overly technical, but I think I have to at this point a little bit, okay? The Act says this, okay? The Act says, Section 53 says the board shall annually cause the chief officer to prepare a budget for the police department. The bylaw says that the board does that in consultation with the CAO and the police chief. The Act then says the budget prepared pursuant to this section shall be submitted to council by the board for approval, okay? That's what Section 53 says. Section 57 says a municipal police department shall consist of a chief officer and such other members, special constables, bylaw enforcement officers, and civilian employees as the council, after consultation with the board, may from time to time determine. So in effect, what we're talking about here is council ultimately decides what the composition will be of the force, and it does that after consultation with the board. I take consultation to mean in this process, such as you're carrying out right now, that the board comes forward with some recommendation to council on that by way of a motion, okay? So I'm hoping that helps in terms of looking at the different legislation and how it combines. The two things are combined. The global amount of the budget going forward, which council can accept or reject, and also council's jurisdiction to determine what the composition of the force will ultimately be. Have I confused things, or is that?
No, we'll come back if folks want to have further clarification on that. Chief, I'm going to go to you.
Thanks, Chair, and through you to the commission. Further discussion and dialogue is going to have to occur, I think, and dissection of the various points. I'll just reiterate that, and I don't disagree that the board and the council can say how many officers, how many civilians. I'm not disagreeing about that at all. What I am going to disagree with, respectfully, is that the commission, in my view, cannot advise, which the motion that has been put forward is advising me on operational matters. And I, I can appreciate the commission can say, you know what, chief, 1.3 mil is too much. We prefer 1.2. And we've had the discussion, we'll continue to have it. If that's the will of the board, that we go back and we work with 1.2, then the board has to let me know that, and I have to come up with a different number. What I'm hearing is that the board is giving operational direction on the deployment of frontline officers, particularly in the area of moving 12 to 8. 12 to 8 has operational repercussions moving forward that I've articulated and I've laid out over a number of meetings now. So I just want to be clear that I understand that that's what that motion speaks to. It's telling me to change my operational ask from 12 to 8. And if that is the request, I respectfully suggest the order or the motion is out of order. And that if, Commissioner Critchley wishes this to come in at 1.2 million as opposed to 1.3 and change, we're happy to go back and bring back an additional presentation on what that would look like for the board or whatever number, quite frankly, that they decide to do. So, and I also will agree that perhaps there is some conflict of interest across the board, as mentioned by Commissioner Critchley. This is a very, very, very important, I would say, milestone in policing. I've been in this business for almost 36 years. I don't ever recall in the business, not even in the 3 years that I've been here almost, where the board has provided operational direction on the deployment of police staff. It may turn out that that is the case and it is the purview of the board, and it may change the way policing is done in the future here in HRP. But I suggest that perhaps an independent view of this from a not involved perspective of either the chief, Commissioner Critchley, or Mr. Ward, to have a more fulsome dialogue on the interpretation of the act, because I think we are separated on this in opinion and in articulation of it. And I would again respectfully suggest that the motion is out of order.
Thanks, Chief. So I'll go to Mr. Ward.
Thank you. I think we might be confusing two things here, right? I agree with the chief. The board does not tell the chief how to deploy the complement that he has, right? That's an operational matter. And council does not tell the chief how to deploy the resources that he has. The problem we run into is the one that we run into, it seems, every meeting, which is the gray area that lies between the board determining or trying to achieve what its responsibilities are under the act and the chief's responsibilities with respect to operational matters. We hit that again, right? And this again is an overlap. So the question becomes, when you look at the act and it says, for example, when it says determining the complement, the chief of such other members, special constables, bylaw enforcement officers, civilian employees. The question is, how deep does that go, right? Does it go to the extent of what Commissioner Critchley is proposing here? Certainly it doesn't go as deep as deployment. So the chief can deploy the resources he has however he wants, right? But the question then becomes, when you look at this, at what point, for example, at what point does the board involve itself? So for example, the chief comes forward with a proposal. The board looks at that proposal and they think that the complement should be somewhat different than that, right? Well, then the board can put that proposal forward, right, to council. But operationally, at some point, the chief will determine who is going to do what, basically, right? Does that help? The board cannot say, for example, you have this person and that person's supposed to do this particular function. They're supposed to do that. That's up to the chief to do it, okay? But a recommendation can come forward to the board, for example, to say, you know, in the board, to carry out its functions under section 55, it feels that the police department should have this kind of a complement or this kind of ability within its forces to handle this, right? But then at some point, it's the chief who determines what those people are going to do on a day-to-day basis, right?
And Marta, that's my understanding. So that provides clarity to me, and that's how I can speak to that when I speak, but I that's how I interpreted what we're talking about today as well. So I'm going to go to.
Let me say something in addition to that, okay? That because if indeed what this goes back to something else the chief said, right? So if, for example, what we're faced with here is the board is not satisfied, for example, with the proposal that's come forward from the chief in terms of the types of officers involved in this thing. Probably as a practical matter, right? The best way to deal with that would be asking the chief, right? Asking the chief to revise that, bearing that in mind, as opposed, I think, to sending it up to council and having this issue, try to have it determined at that point. I think council would be looking for the board, for example, to come up with something that's acceptable to the board and the chief in order to approve that. That's my sense. Although that's a bit gratuitous on my part.
And no, thank you. And Commissioner Kent just had a question for you before you leave.
Yeah, thank you. And so Marty, I'm just wondering, I feel like what you now have said would in fact deem this Commissioner Critchley's motion out of order. For instance, and not only because of that, because it's the detail, the devil's in the detail in the motion. The motion that we presented to council was not a motion that reads like this, to this kind of degree of detail, which is essentially fixing the chief to something what I think now is out of order, and I always did. But we as a council, we get information from the chief to give us that rationale that shows that the amount of the budget that he's asking for is in order. And we approved a larger one. It went to council. Council then contributed to a dialogue and debate before and after the Councillor Mancini's motion was put on the floor that reduced it and ultimately was put back to the board. That motion did not have this kind of detail. The debate had that kind of detail, which influenced, when it was approved, it influenced the discussion and consideration that the chief would have then had in his capacity as chief with his team to come back to now inform and justify in accordance with what that motion was mandating a reduced amount, and why that a reduced amount and how that reduced amount could be spent within his operating capacity. And so I feel like we should be deeming this particular motion, and although and from frankly what I see in the chat is not in the form of a motion, and I kind of struggle with that as well, because we rely on that to go back to that and see what the full extent of the motion is. So I would ask that Commissioner Critchley retract that motion and put a motion on the floor that is about the amount that he's interested in. If he's interested in a less amount, then that's something we can debate. We all have the ability to weigh in on it and decide whether or not we want to support it and for what. But that can influence council as well. It's on public record. But it's the ultimate decision is around the budgeted amount. Again, I won't be supporting it, but I think that it's important that we get this piece right. I'm looking at the motion that I moved that went to council first, and it's around approved operating budget as set out in the discussion in the accompanying report. Recommend the Halifax Council approve the proposed Halifax Regional Police. Okay, and the there's no reference to all of the particulars that I think we have clearly articulated today is the chief's call. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Marty, I just want if you could weigh in really quickly, because there's two things to address here. One is the powers that council have with the act, and then there's the powers that the commission have with the act. So it'd be good just for clarity on that piece. And maybe Commissioner Critchley, if you can put this in the form of a motion, that might help as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Sorry, I was just asked to Commissioner Kent's point for the numbers, so I provided the numbers. I'll provide it in the form of a motion.
I think the chair also asked for the motion to be put in the chat. So thank you for and maybe that's where the confusion is coming from, Commissioner Critchley, is that all we see is the numbers, and we do rely on these chat motions. If the motion is not before us in the agenda, then it should be there in the chat. So sorry for interrupting, Mr. Chair.
No, that's fine. So Mr. Critchley, if you can put that in the form of motion, that'd be great. And if when you put it in there, we'll just make sure that Andrea or Ian can pretty up for you. And Marty, just really quickly, you can just speak on the legislative differences between council and the commission. That might be helpful as well.
One of the, the bylaw, what the bylaw says is the bylaw, well, the act says that the board is supposed to, they're going to require the chief to produce a budget, and then they're going to look at that budget in terms of what your responsibilities are under the act, and then you're to submit a budget to council, right? The last budget that went forward, as I understood, did assign, correct me if I'm wrong, but it did, if I recall, had it referenced different positions and numbers of positions, right? Now, what the bylaw says is that the board, right, is supposed to prepare and submit a budget to council in consultation with the chief and the chief administrative officer. So that implies a consultative process that goes on where there should be some agreement, right, at this level between the board and the chief administrative officer as to what the budget should be as it goes forward and the board submits it to council, okay? And we don't, the question is, do we have that? That's the process that's supposed to take place, and that's the process that should be taking place at the board at this meeting, right? And then when it goes forward, then council will pass on the global amount of that budget, which would also, right, at the same time include reference to the complement, okay? And it's a question of how deep. I don't know. That issue has not come before council before. Council has not been in a position where they were being asked to look at the actual composition beyond, say, the number of officers and the total size of the force, that sort of thing, right? Does that help? In other words, if it seems to me as a practical matter, if Commissioner Critchley wants a change in the complement as put forward by the police right now, that's something that should be worked out in consultation at this particular time, right? Before the budget goes up to council, I think.
Thank you. Commissioner Blackburn, I know you did have you do have another commitment. Is there anything you want to weigh in before you go, or are you okay?
No, I'm fine. Just wanted to thank the rest of the commission and Marty and team for helping us guide us through this process. But no, my apologies. I have a public information meeting that starts at 6 o'clock on a major development in my district, so I do have to duck out. So thank you all very much, and we will see you soon.
Thank you, Councilor.
Sorry, Chair Smith, are we going to lose quorum if?
So that was going to be the next question. So you're right in my mind, Commissioner Critchley. So quorum is what?
Quorum is 4 people for the Board of Police Commissioners. So we are currently at 4 members in the meeting. We will not be able to lose another member.
All right. So we, just for clarity, if we lose another member for whatever reason, if somebody's computer drops out or their connection drops out, we will lose quorum. So Ian and Andrea, I'll just ask you to monitor the meeting just to make sure that if someone does drop out for any reason, that you just give us a heads up. Thank you. Okay, so Commissioner, we heard from Commissioner McDougall. Anything before I go for a second round from you?
No.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just read quickly before we go to the second round of speaking. I think we are at an interesting road here at the moment where the commission, from my understanding and my personal view, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not in law school, but from my read of the act and what our powers are, that this is actually in order in the sense of we are providing our oversight as the civilian governance body of how we feel not how the day-to-day where officers will be placed in how they will be placed in what they were doing, but more on we were presented options to meet the operational issues within within the police force, which our chief has provided us with that information. And we are taking the information from the asks related to those enhancements in providing our input as a commission on how we feel those items should operate. Now, for example, if this was truly operational in the sense of we couldn't make these changes, if the overarching motion was to fail, then there is a potential that the police could challenge that, saying that, well, you as a commission have not passed our ask, which technically you can't do that because you've now affected our operational aspect of our policing. So to me, if the commission, and this is again my view of it, if the commission can't make these type of requests and changes, then really there'd be no reason for the chief to present other than a number to us, because at that point, us saying no would then mean that we've affected the overarching operational aspect of the police. So that's why I feel, and Marty agrees, and if there is a challenge on that, if this passes, then we might have to take it further. But I do believe that we can, as a commission, with the information that's provided and how it's presented to us, have a say on what we want to send to council, but not on how those are going to operate day to day if this passes. So that's where I agree that this is in order, and it will be up to council to decide whether or not the number and the information that has been provided to council through the motion, because the council motion also referenced the report that was attached that did have the service enhancements included to it. So council was approving what came out of our discussions here at the commission. So I do feel that this is an appropriate discussion. The only thing that I would, if I was to make an amendment, I would ask Commissioner Critchley if we could include, because there is 131 or so left over, if we could include the position that was, and I'm just trying to bring it up here, the victim services case, the victim services, the sexual assault investigation team constable. So I do want a little bit of clarity, and I don't know if I'll make that amendment or not, but Chief, I know you said this many times, but we've had many meetings. Can you just provide a little bit more clarity on what the role of the sexual assault investigation detective constable does?
So thanks, Chair, and through you to the commission. So I don't have my notes exactly in front of me from the previous meetings, but this is mostly around serving our most vulnerable in society from a crime perspective. And it really is about workload and capacity at the investigative level. The ask was for 2 constables, detective constables, to help with that. We have seen a trending increase in the sexual assaults that we have been getting. And I think in 2011, it was 400, and don't quote me, and I think it's up to approximately 600 a year now. So, it has been rising. So this would be for that. I would just caution that all of this has to be evaluated in the totality of the priorities for the organization. And, we will continue to do that and deploy responsibly and appropriately.
Thanks, Chief. All right, so moving on to our second round of speakers, starting with Commissioner Pritchett.
Perhaps Chair Smith, where it's my motion, if Commissioner Kent, if you want to make some points, then it makes it easier for me to respond to them.
Yeah, so you want to close?
If that's all right.
Yep, not a problem. So Commissioner Kent.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if on a procedural item, if I want to put a motion of deferral on for this for an opportunity to have all members of the commission at the table and considering this. Am I able to do that? Should I do it now? Should I obviously we need to also agree on that. And I don't know what the rule is around number, if it's needs to be, if it's, I don't know, 2/3 consent. I don't know. I don't remember any of that. But I really do feel like, and I know the chief has some questions, that it would be worthwhile having him have an opportunity to consider. I would like to see we're missing 3 out of 7. And yes, we have quorum, but I believe that this is important enough to consider deferral.
So can Ian and Marty jump in? My understanding to that question is we would have to deal with the motion that's currently on the floor. So either Commissioner Critchley would have to withdraw it, or you could make an amendment to the motion, which would be a deferral with the motion that's currently in the chat. That's my understanding, and Ian or Marty, you can jump in on the process if a deferral was to be asked for today on this item.
I don't know if Ian's waiting for me or I'm waiting for Ian. But I think, a member can make a commissioner can make a motion for deferral at any time, right? So I suppose you could, notwithstanding amendment, that's my understanding, right? They could defer this and defer something else. You could defer this, then defer the main motion, but I wait, see what Ian says about that too.
Yeah, that's why we have many screens going on today. A motion to defer is to be treated as a motion to table, so it can be made at any point in time, and it could be deferring the entire item, which is the amending motion that's on the floor today. So that is something, and if that motion is formally made, it does need to be dealt with immediately.
Yeah, I'd like to put that motion on the floor then, Mr. Chair. Perhaps Ian, you can put that in the chat.
So just really quickly, just in terms of process, so the current motion that's on the floor would be an amendment to the main motion. So then the deferral would be a deferral to this amendment. So at any time, and this is for me, anytime a deferral can be put forward, even if it's on an amendment that's on the main motion, a deferral is in order at any point in time.
I think my understanding is that the motion as amended, right? The motion with the proposal for amendment can be deferred at any time. The whole thing can be deferred, right?
Right.
Basically,
so then we would vote on the deferral, and if the deferral passes, then the motion gets deferred. If it doesn't pass, then we're back on the amendment.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, that's helpful. So then so now the deferral has to be moved and seconded in order for it to be up for discussion, or is a deferral?
Chair Smith, can I ask a quick clarifying question?
Yeah, one sec. So in terms for the deferral to be on the floor, it has to get moved and seconded, correct?
That is correct. The
Okay.
one other condition for that is that every member must have the opportunity to speak to the item that is on the floor before the deferral. So if there was somebody who wanted to speak to the amendment, they could speak to it. But then the deferral would be if a deferral is made and seconded, then that would be the item that is discussed.
So what I'm going to do, Commissioner Kent, is because Commissioner Critchley wants to speak for a second time, and then Commissioner McDougall, I see your hand up. So I'm going to go to them first, and then I'm going to come back to you for the deferral motion. So Commissioner Critchley.
Well, I'm happy. I don't think Carol has spoken once yet.
Oh,
so
yes, you're right. Correct.
Can I just add something else, Chair, before we go into that, just if it helps on the form of the motion. The thing is, we're dealing with something that's over and above the budget here, requests for something over and above the budget. And so for that to go forward to council, right, you're asking for specific money for specific reasons. And that's why it's broken down into particular positions, right? Whether it's for a hate crime unit or whether it's for victim services or whatever it is, right? When that comes to council, council's looking at this overage, the global, they're looking and saying, okay, what do you need it for, right? In order to find out what you need it for, you have to look, that has to be broken into some sort of rational thing they can look at. And that's in terms of positions, right? So that's why the motion is that form. But if council, for example, approves it, that does not mean, and I said this before, the chief is still in charge operationally. He tells those people what to do, right? The fact that council approves a position does not mean operationally that the chief needs to do it. So for example, if you look right now at what the chief has had to do through COVID, right? Through COVID, the chief has had to redeploy people from certain positions to do other jobs. And that is the operational aspect of it. So hopefully that assists a little bit the board in terms of the form of the motion.
Thanks, Marty. Commissioner McDougall.
So thanks, everyone. I've certainly been listening a lot. I kind of feel like Commissioner Kent that with four of us here, we're kind of in a situation that we've not been in before. And I really think we need 7 people, all commissioners, to be part of this discussion and to vote on whatever path we're going to take going forward. And so I would support deferring this. I realize that's a challenge in terms of presenting the budget and, you know, the business units and the time frame that's established and all that. But I just think it's a really important discussion we're having. And I think with 7 commissioners and now 3 missing, we would be not doing our due diligence to just go ahead and kind of debate the kind of debate or continue the debate we're having without having the others here to hear and be part of that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kent, do you want to speak on the motion that's on the floor? Or would you want to come back? Okay, you want to come back at the end?
I have said all I need to say.
All right, so just marking to make sure I get everybody on their second time. So Commissioner Critchley, you're the last one to speak for the second time on this one.
To be clear, Mr. Chair, though, if I want to come back after Councilor
Yes,
Commissioner
for
Critchley,
the
I can come
deferral.
back.
Yeah. So I'm doing what Ian said, making sure everybody has an opportunity to speak, and then I'll come back to you.
Okay.
So
thank you, Chair Smith. I'm going to say a couple things relating to police governance generally, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about this motion. And then I'm
And
hopefully
you have
gonna
3 minutes to
present-
do that.
Okay, and then I'm hopefully, well, you know, Commissioner Kent was saying it was good I was talking slow, so I won't talk slow then. And then I'm going to offer a resolution, both in light of the concerns that have been raised, but also in light of the limited number of people here. When I joined this board, every member of this board has had to listen to me talk about board governance and the powers of the board and the jurisdiction of the board. And I've probably talked your ear off many times to an annoying degree. This issue about where the dividing line between policy and operations rests is a fundamental one. It's one that, you know, there was a CBC article just the other day about how, you know, around Canada, there's a lot of confusion around this point around policy and operations. In bringing this amendment, I tried to do my due diligence. I went and read the Morden report, which I've recommended to commissioners a number of times. Morden, you know, a retired Ontario Court of Appeal Justice in Ontario, retired Ontario Court of Appeal Justice, made the point that the board's powers, to the extent that they deal with policy, necessarily and always have a bearing on operational matters, to the extent that operations is, to an extent, the implementation of policy. So that's an important point. Policy matters and the board's powers always have some bearing on operational matters. So this suggests that there's you know, an iron curtain between those things. Doesn't make sense. It's not in keeping with the legislation. I guess, you know, at the end of the day, in pure financial terms, the differences between what I've proposed in an amendment and what the chief has presented is $130,000. And what I would be happy to do, if it's in the will of the majority of the board, is withdraw my motion if I can, you know, put front and center this point around police governance. I have said from the beginning, I said it in our work plan, the board needs a robust, fulsome, systematic, independent legal opinion about its powers and about precisely these matters. And that's not to suggest that Marty couldn't provide that opinion. I've suggested, you know, reasons why we might want to go independent. The chief has now said that he would like independence on that. Again, it has to do with perceptions of conflict of interest as it relates to providing legal services to both the board as an independent legal entity, right, and the HRM and the HRP as a business unit of the HRM. So what I will suggest, if I can have, you know, if the other members are agreeing, if at the very next meeting, I can bring a motion that says, we're going to pay somebody to do a very extensive independent legal opinion about the board's powers, about the board's jurisdiction, about these distinctions between policy and operations. If other members of the board are in agreement with that, I don't want to, especially with only 4 members here, I don't want to be doing things that make people uncomfortable. And I'm happy to act out of an abundance of caution. Like I've said, I've tried to do my due diligence in terms of understanding where the distinctions in our policies lie, or sorry, where the distinctions, you know, and the limits of our jurisdictions rest. I think I've done that effectively by looking at these precedents and best practices from other jurisdictions. But I am happy to defer, to withdraw the motion, to allow the chief's motion to go ahead if other members of the commission, and I understand there's only 3 of you here, are in support of, at the very next meeting, resolving this very important point, you know, bringing a motion and passing a motion to hire somebody to give us precisely this information that is so critical to our work going forward. You know, this distinction, as Marty said, between policy and operations, that gray area, it comes up every meeting. And again, we're kind of going around and around in circles. So again, that's what I'm happy to do. I'm not here to make anyone uncomfortable, to touch any nerves, to overstep. I think that, you know, and Marty has confirmed that I'm acting within our jurisdiction. But I'm happy, out of an abundance of caution, to withdraw the motion if in exchange, other commissioners would support getting an independent legal opinion initiated at the very next meeting. That's what I'm going to just put that there.
Okay, Chair, could I speak to that? We seem to be getting increasingly complicated here. It seems to me that if Commissioner Critchley wants to withdraw his motion here, he's free to do that. Can he condition it on what appears to be a notice of motion for a motion at a following meeting? I don't think so. I think that's out of order. Okay. On the other hand, he's free to bring that motion. The only thing I'd say about that motion is, and we've talked about, he's exactly right. This issue comes up meeting after meeting, right? And the reason it comes up is because the legislation itself is far from clear on this particular issue. And I think if he gives his notice of motion and you go and get a separate opinion, I don't see any problem with that. The problem is it's very difficult for someone to actually opine on that particular issue when the legislation itself isn't clear. So you may just be getting back a legal opinion that's uncertain in itself because the legislation is uncertain. And I'm sure Commissioner Chrisley, if he's looking for certainty, there's no certainty in the legislation. And I don't think anybody's going to be able to give an opinion with that kind of, that, you know, for any number of years, the board has been, you know, struggling with this, with the uncertainty in the legislation. Perhaps the legislation could be clear and maybe the legislature should make it so if it's possible. But I just wanted to throw those comments in. But for the moment, I think you're left procedurally with a situation where this motion could be, the options are to defer this motion. The options are to withdraw this motion. And that can be there can be a notice of motion for the next meeting, but I don't think you can condition either one of those on the future. Okay, so.
Just a point of clarification, I'm not trying to I'm not saying I'll only do it if you agree to it now, but I'm saying this is my intention. I'm going to bring this notice. And you know, that was my rationale. But again, it's not I understand procedurally, I can't wring anybody's arm to do anything. So.
Thanks, Commissioner. Jerry.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to comment, and I know the commissioners are saying they're down to a quorum of 4, and it's unfortunate. I mean, this meeting was put in place to accommodate everybody's schedules and certainly respect, mention that with all respect, but I just want to say council is expecting something back on this on Friday. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. So right now, everyone has spoken twice on the main motion. So I'm going back to Commissioner Kent to bring on the deferral and not debate on the motion that's on the floor currently.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Marty, for clarifying that. And Commissioner Critchley, thank you for clarifying that you were not, in fact, asking us to commit to supporting a motion that you would in fact be bringing to the table. I would think that's completely unreasonable. I would not consider dropping the deferral in order for you to do that. I think that's completely unreasonable and a really poor approach to good governance. I am supportive of the notion that you would want to bring this back to the table. I don't think there's a commissioner on this team that would expect anything different from you at some point, because you have spoke to it. We've spoke to it in our strategic planning as well. But this whole entire commission should follow all the due processes, as Marty pointed out, and we should all have the opportunity to debate soundly a motion of that nature. So the other piece, though, Jerry, and I had a funny feeling that might be the case. We have a budget schedule. And yes, council has a date of Friday to revisit this, but the facts are we still have time, and maybe it's an opportunity for you guys can work on your scheduling, but I'm not prepared tonight to participate. I would rather defer this and us come to a collaborative decision based on voting and based on all the information at the table with the entire commission on this important. We are at a juncture. I know the chief mentioned that, and we are at a point, we have an expectation of our public to be doing a better job. And I don't know that tonight we are achieving that when we have 4 members. Any one of us could have to leave unexpectedly, and that could put an end to it. But I would rather see us work together to defer it and bring everyone back to the table and make a decision that we then forward to council. And I believe council would want that. And you know, I think we are going down a slippery place if we think that we cannot make our decisions in our timeline and do justice to the role that we have committed to, not only for the police commission, but for our role that we've been appointed to by council. So I'm if you want to rescind, if you're open to rescinding, then I'd be thrilled. But if you're not, I'm not willing to support something that locks me into a future decision tonight. So thank you for clarifying that, and your wording certainly mattered tonight in regards to that. So I'll leave it there, and we'll see where this lands.
So at this point, you have to put the deferral on the floor.
I would like to defer this motion to a future special meeting as organized through the chair, in as quick a time fashion as possible. Obviously, I need it, and hoping someone will second that.
I'll second it.
So seconded by Commissioner McDougall. So the motion is now on the floor. Commissioner Kent.
I think I've said as much as I need to say. I call for the question if there's no one else.
No, I see Mr. Critchley. Commissioner Critchley.
Oh, okay.
I know my hand was up. I didn't mean it to be. And yeah, again, Commissioner Kent, to your point, I am someone concerned with governance. I'm not trying to act in an unreasonable manner. But I do think that this has brought to a head these kind of concerns around governance. I would not, of course, suggest that, but I would not, of course, hold you to anything. But I guess what I'm suggesting is that if there was support, that's important for me to know, right? Is there support in drilling down and understanding these things? I think there is, from the work plan and from your own comments. That was the extent of what I was suggesting, is that I understand the timelines and the concerns around that. I'm happy to, and so really it was just a point around, is this a concern for other commissioners? And I can see it is. The debate has become more heated than normal as it relates to this issue around the limits of our jurisdiction. And with that in mind, it's something that I think we should explore further. But in keeping with the concerns around scheduling and the hard work that's gone into this, that's the point I was suggesting around wanting to rescind.
Okay. Oh, I see we got the big guns in the meeting. Mr. Traves, hello. He arises out of the ashes in the smoke.
Mr. Traves or Mr. Dubé?
No, I see Mr. Traves on the line.
Okay, yeah.
Jacques, would you prefer to go first, or you want me to talk about the timing for tomorrow?
You go first, John, and I'll weed in after. Thanks.
So just before, look, thank you very much, board. I've been listening and I appreciate the conversation. I did just want to make sure you're aware before you vote on the motion to defer that, there are tight timelines. The budget committee is scheduled and will be meeting tomorrow. There was a discussion at agenda review that they would go ahead even if the board was unable to make a recommendation, the preference being that there would be a recommendation coming out tonight, assuming there is still an agenda. And to that extent, they may make a decision, and I can't speak for that, around the complement that the chief is asking for. And as Marty has said, operationally, the chief can deploy the sworn officers he sees fit. But
that is something that could happen. Of course, that has budget implications. All of these are interrelated. As the discussion has gone, quite clearly that the budget depends on the number of employees in many cases. The employees and a decision around how many sworn officers are hired is informed by the cost of that. And then, obviously a decision either, in terms of the number of employees is informed by how the chief will deploy them operationally. It doesn't mean that approving the budget forces the chief to deploy them in a certain way, other than, how that comes together. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware there was an intent to go forward with the meeting tomorrow on the budget committee. Given the pressures the municipality is under to meet the timelines around budget, it would be helpful if a decision was reached tonight, but that is within the board's purview as to how you wish to go ahead. Thank you for that.
Jacques?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to add to what John is saying, so we're at a bit of a logjam here at the moment. So the challenge we have operationally, but from the budget operations perspective, is that I'm obliged to produce a budget annually for council, and we have a process that gets us to that point. We scheduled a meeting for Friday with council to deal with the decision of the Board of Police Commissioners tonight, or today's decision, should one be achieved. And I guess it's probably not lost on any of you. The next week is March break, so trying to arrange a meeting next week is probably next to impossible, right? So, not from a staff perspective, but I'm just wondering who's going to be available at the board. You had a number of members missing tonight or today, and I would suspect we probably have a significant challenge getting a quorum next week as well, given this March break, and some people have planned vacations and out of the province, etc. I have no idea what the status of the board members are in this case, but I'm just surmising that there may be a challenge around that. So I doubt that we could actually pull off, I have serious doubts we could pull off a meeting next week, which then brings us to the week of March 20th, right? The next meeting of council, that week is March 22nd. That's the first time that council will be getting together after this Friday, because there's no possibility of meetings next week with council. It is March 3rd. And we have budget meetings that week to talk about the budget adjustment list. In other words, we're coming to the end of the budget process, and the council needs to understand where all the business units lie, including, in this case, the Board of Police Commissioners' recommendation on the budget. Right now, it appears that there's about $100,000 in a difference on a fairly large budget, which is not a material amount of money, in fact, right? So, certainly my advice, and I think Jerry's advice and John's advice, would be to try to achieve some kind of an understanding today. And I support what Marty has said. To the extent, when you produce a budget, you have to know what goes into the budget. So right now, what came to council was an increase. It was a recommendation of the board based on a number of positions that the board was requesting council to endorse and to approve, because council is the one that has to approve the number of positions under the act, right? So that was totally legitimate. So, if the board and then council said, well, look, here's a new number we'd like you to reach. So if the board decides that it wants to recommend to council that number, based on the addition of a number of positions, I think that's totally legitimate, right? And it's also totally legitimate to say, well, if you want a budget of $100,000 less based on a number of positions, that's totally legitimate too. But what I'm urging you to do, in fact, pleading with you, is to try to reach an agreement tonight so that we can bring this matter before council. If it doesn't go, if there's no recommendation come from the board, to John's point, council may deliberate on this on Friday in any case. I can't predict that. I can't say how that will work out, but that is an option for council to look at. It would be certainly not the recommended approach, certainly not for me, but I think council is at an end of a process and has extended the opportunity for the board to reconsider this matter. and come back with advice. So I just lay out that information with respect to everyone concerned here. That, you know, if possible, if you can reach a decision tonight, wonderful. If you can't, we'll have to try to work around that some way. Either council makes a decision on Friday, or if it doesn't, they would have to wait for the Board of Police Commissioners to come back and the next available date for the board. And so it would have to happen on March 21st, the day before the board meeting of the 22nd, right? Because after that, the next meetings after that are all about budget adjustment lists and trying to land a budget so that we can actually finalize the budget on April the 12th. So that's sort of the track that we're on. We don't have a lot of wiggle room in the budget process per se at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jacques. Commissioner Critchley for second time on the deferral.
Well, I guess, Chair Smith, what I'm going to do is rescind my motion, which would hopefully render Commissioner Kent's motion unnecessary. And I do so because I want to be a team player. I want to work together with other members of this commission. I've also made known my desire to work on and address some of these governance issues. So later in the meeting, I will bring a notice of motion to that effect. But I see the concerns and I see the small amount of money that we're here talking about. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate Mr. Ward indicating that in his view the motion was in order. That's been my opinion. I appreciate Commissioner Kent, you sharing your own opinion, and the chief, you doing the same. So again, that'll speak to the notice of motion that I'll bring later in the meeting. But in light of these concerns around timing, and again, I've been the first to protect and safeguard the statutory independence of the board, right? To suggest that we have duties under the act to ensure that the budget is in keeping with our values. And that takes as long as it takes. But to the points that have been raised, I see that we're wading into new territory. And when you do that, you need to do so carefully. And to perhaps the Commissioner Kent's point, you need to do that with a full complement of members. So I will rescind the motion, not because I believe it's out of order, because I believe it's not, but for the other reasons that I've stated.
But in Ian, I think you might have your hand up for this. If Commissioner Critchley rescinds the motion, that then the deferral is now gone. So then we're back on the main motion.
We actually should get a withdrawal of the deferral motion before we have a conversation or a debate on the motion that is being considered for deferral. So we actually should have we should actually have Commissioner Kent withdraw the deferral motion so that can be discussed. And we do have Commissioner Blackburn in the meeting. So if the motion from Commissioner Critchley is intended to be withdrawn, we do have a seconder that can approve, that can be okay with that as well.
Great, that helps. The other piece of it too then is so Commissioner Kent decides to withdraw the deferral. Mr. Critchley then decides to withdraw his amendment. Then we're back on the main motion. And then the main motion, from what I'm hearing from discussion, a deferral is what we're looking to do because of folks not being here. The main motion will be deferred, but then we'd still have to provide the rationale of why we're deferring it, or we're just deferring it. We can just defer it just to defer it and to have it open to another meeting.
Or sorry, Chair Smith, point of clarification, is that all right? Or I don't know if
yeah, it might help me.
No, the reason I am rescinding is so that we can vote on the proposal in light of the concerns around the timeline.
Okay.
Presumably that's what Commissioner Kent wants as well, right? Or Commissioner Kent, do you not want to vote on the proposal?
Thank you. I didn't want to vote on the amended motion. I'm
Okay.
okay with voting on the original motion. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry,
Ian?
Chair, so for this conversation to occur, we really should be discussing the discussion of the deferral right now
Okay,
on
right.
the
Okay.
amending motion.
Okay,
Yes,
so
thank you.
I am open to withdrawing my deferral because of the contribution in the debate that Commissioner Critchley has put forward and the rationale related to his future movement with this amendment. And yeah, I'll add more later. Thank you.
Okay,
So I withdraw that deferral motion.
In the seconder, Commissioner McDougall, you're okay with that?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so the deferral has been withdrawn. So now we're back on the amendment. And Commissioner Critchley, would you like to withdraw your amendment?
Yeah, I will. I'll withdraw the amendment.
Okay, so the amendment has been withdrawn. Our seconder is not here at the moment. So does that mean, Ian, somebody else
Oh.
can just be the seconder? Or, oh, wait, you're
I
here.
think-
Sorry.
I'm here. Yep. Sorry,
Wow.
the only one person signed up for the public information meeting, so it was over in record time.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. Speaker name, she appears. So thank you. So the amendment has now been withdrawn. So we're back on the main motion, not amended. So we've already exhausted our speakers list on the main motion.
Question?
All right. So the question's been called. All those in favor of the main motion, which, just for reminder, we are talking about the motion non-amended that was presented to us from the chief with the positions that were highlighted with the presentation with no changes. Just for clarity for folks who've been paying attention. So question's been called. All those in favor of the motion on the floor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Nay. So me and Commissioner Critchley, nay. So that motion passes. So that gets forwarded to council. So just really quickly, maybe Jerry. Jerry, so now does this go to council tomorrow?
Council actually is for Friday, so.
Sorry, Friday. I don't know what day
Yeah.
it is. I can't keep track.
So what the board passes in terms of the budget resolution, that will move forward to council in a report for debate on Friday.
Okay, great. All right, well, with that, thank you, commissioners. That was actually a very, very good discussion, and I really appreciate all the dialogue this evening. Just going to the agenda here. My head's a little foggy at the moment. That was a lot of procedural discussion there. So we dealt with the revised budget. We dealt with the added item. And now just go to the next item, which is the date of our next meeting, which is March 21st, 2022, and call for adjournment. Motion to adjourn by Commissioner Critchley.
Chair Smith, can I bring my notice of motion, or have I already done that effectively?
Can we, it's not on my agenda. Those motions are still in order, correct? I don't know. I'm not sure how that works.
Chair Smith, if the commissioner has a notice of motion, he can make it at this point in time. It is a meeting of the Board of Police Commissioners.
Okay, all right.
Great. So I can't remember the wording. Take notice that at the March 21, 2021 meeting of the Board of Police Commissioners, I will be moving that the Board of Police Commissioners seek an independent legal opinion relating to its jurisdiction, including as it relates to the review and approval of the annual HRP budget.
So I guess the only thing you'll need to do is just when you get a chance to the typing and put that into a motion list, and then we can have that for our next meeting. Ian, that works?
Yes, we'll connect with the commissioner and make sure we have all the paperwork made for that.
All right, excellent. So German's already been called by Commissioner Pritchett. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a good evening and see you all again soon. Take care.